Hey everybody, welcome back to The Contrarian. I hope you're all doing well. Today I really want to talk about gold and silver. Again, it seems my most favorite topic to talk about the last year or more. Especially in the last few months, this has been a major focus of mine. I've been a major bull in the precious metals space for probably some 3 years now, but mainly focusing on it in the last year with, of course, gold, breaking higher, and then silver breaking higher, to where both have now set new all-time highs in later 2025. I'm recording this video November 10th, so this is you know uh, I would say just 2 weeks into this kind of pullback we've seen. If anything, it appears like gold and silver may have actually bottomed out in the last few days. I'm not 100% certain on that, but that's kind of my overall read on it, at least right now. I want to talk about why I still am very optimistic going into the end of this year and into early next year. So I feel like as we get to the end of 2025 as precious metals investors, it's been a very um, you know, uh, it's been a very spectacular year, to put it mildly. I mean, gold has had its best year since 1979. 1979 was its record year for, breaking higher. It went parabolic essentially at that point. And then just a few months later, it hit its peak of that cycle. It took a while for it to, it took decades for gold to see that high again. It took some 30 years. So, these are very drawn out cycles. They only happen maybe twice in a lifetime or something like that. So it's just a very historic time to be alive. If you understand what to look for in these kinds of monetary changes, to put it simply, monetary system changes, we're seeing a shift away from US asset based reserves, so a shift away from dollars and treasuries to something like gold, something that is a universally recognized asset that is also not someone's liability, that also physically exists. So I feel like gold and something physical like gold, silver maybe as well, kind of is the only thing that fits that bill. Because, Bitcoin, you could make the argument that it's limited scarcity and things like that, but it doesn't physically exist. It's not a commodity. You can't use it for anything, at least not that I'm aware of. So, Bitcoin bulls like to make the argument that it's kind of competing for gold. I don't really see it as competing with gold because, gold is just such a crucial money. It is money throughout human history. Thousands of years has been money. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. And I think we're kind of shifting back to that. We're shifting away from this whole fiat-based, trust-based system. Suddenly, when trust begins to be eroded, you have to shift back to more certain things like the element itself, of gold. Um, so kind of stepping off my soapbox there, where we are right now, we had a recent pullback, of course. Gold reached almost $4,400 an ounce. Silver reached around 54 and change an ounce. So new all-time highs for silver finally. Gold, of course, has been setting new all-time highs for almost 2 years now, but silver just in the last month started setting new all-time highs, finally breaking above the $50 an ounce level, which it was last at around 1980. So it took, 1980 and then 2011, I should say. So in both of those cycles, silver basically touched the $50 an ounce level and then sold off substantially. And so 2011 to now, that's about 14 years that it took silver to get back to its previous all-time high, and it's finally setting new all-time highs again. Um, so silver hasn't really had that kind of, I would say, foundational central bank buying that gold has had for the last, decade or more, but really starting in the last 2 years, substantially. Gold has had just massive, I would say, just constant buying from central banks, whether it's People's Bank of China, recently Polish central bank, but also one could say probably the COMEX, buying more gold recently. I don't know that for sure, but that's somewhat speculative on my part to say that. But that's just maybe taking a look at price action that started occurring in gold in the last year, kind of after the administrative change that took place in the U.S. That's just a noticeable thing on my part, at least. Just seeing the massive amounts of central bank buying stepping into gold, really not the retail buying getting into gold yet. Silver has probably had more of the retail type buying pressure going into silver. So, we've had a recent pullback. I think that's very healthy. Gold and silver both pulled back around 10%. Silver touching, the 47 an ounce area and change a few days ago. Gold retesting the $3,800 an ounce area. So both of them pulling back about 10%, having some healthy consolidation. I think just looking at the overall sentiment out there, it really did help to reset investors' sentiment. I'm not seeing just day after day headlines about gold breaking higher and analysts' expectations going through the roof and everything like that. It tends to make me nervous as a contrarian. I start thinking that, a lot of people are starting to agree with me, which isn't a bad thing, but that's an indication that I'm starting to need to think about going elsewhere. And so when that kind of enthusiasm gets reset, it makes me more optimistic because I see more upside ahead. And that's what I see right now. Nothing has fundamentally changed. There's still going to be deficit spending going on in the US for sure, and other countries around the world for sure. That's not going to go away. Deficit spending is going to accelerate from here, in my opinion. There's really no way around that. Empires gradually debase their currency. Maybe it's possible for the US to just so understate inflation that eventually the debt is inflated away or something like that. I mean, that would destroy the purchasing power of the citizens, of course. So that would still be an enormous monetary reset. It wouldn't go the way of defaulting, though. So, you either default on your debt obligations or you print them. You print the underlying currency until the debt obligation becomes effectively worthless. It's kind of one or the other. And historically, central banks have always gone, or pretty much always gone, the route of inflating away their debt. So it appears to me that that is what the US is trying to do. Other central banks are doing the same thing. It's not just the US, but, so nothing fundamentally has changed. I still see erosion of trust around the world between governments and also between citizens and their own governments. So, trust overall around the world is being eroded. That's very bullish for gold and silver. And recently, silver was categorized as a critical mineral in the US. It's on the critical minerals list. It's an element, I get it, so it's not technically correct, but it's listed on the critical minerals list, along with things like copper, uranium, etc. Probably something like lithium too, cobalt. I mean, all of these elements, minerals, are critical for US industries. Silver especially because it's, in so many of these modern electronic, AI or tech-based industries, of course. And so that is fundamentally why it was added to this list. The US, of course, imports a lot of its silver. I think this kind of classification is very bullish for US-based silver miners. So, anything like Hecla, I'd be very bullish on, but, not to list individual stocks, but any kind of US-based silver producer, I'd be very bullish on because I could easily see the US taking stakes in those kinds of companies as they have in other companies. But also when it comes to, stockpiling silver, I think the US might go that route as well. We've seen other governments do that, China, Russia, I think even Brazil recently. Don't quote me on that, but I heard rumors of just other lesser countries around the world forming strategic stockpiles of silver, much like they have strategic petroleum reserves or something like that, to where if their supply chain is cut off temporarily, they have a backup, to where I could see the US doing a similar thing with silver simply because we import so much of our silver. I think it's around 60% actually of the silver we use is imported. So it'd be crucial if you're worried about supply chain reliability as a U.S. politician, I would think it would be important to stockpile silver. It's not something I'm counting on or anything like that, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out. I could see the U.S. doing something like that. So I think it overall just brings, importance back into the silver market. Of course, it's not just this metal that old guys like to hoard American Eagles made out of. It's not like this kind of numismatic token that has no real use. Like silver is used in so many day-to-day things. And the important thing to keep in mind with silver is when it's used in these industrial applications, it is so rare that it can actually be recycled later. And so usually when it's used in solar panels or electronics or whatever, it's not recovered after that. Like that silver is spent. You have to go and mine more of it because it's just so. It does not make economic sense to go and try to strip all the silver off of these solar panels once they're used and things like that. It just doesn't make sense to do that. So something like gold, you mine it and it'll probably continue to be recycled even if it's used in something like a computer chip, just because gold is so valuable. It's $4,000 an ounce. That's pretty valuable. Silver is close to $50 an ounce. That is semi-valuable, but in the grand scheme of things, probably doesn't make sense to try to recycle it. And so almost all the silver used industrially goes away permanently. So you have to mine more of it. That's an important thing to keep in mind because gold doesn't really have that issue. And so most of the gold that's ever been mined is still in existence, still used in some way, jewelry or, in central bank vaults somewhere, maybe Fort Knox. So bottom line, I myself still very bullish on gold and silver and the miners going forward. Of course, we're starting to see a lot of these miners report just spectacular earnings. A couple miners that I own in the last week had really good earnings reports, and it's interesting to observe the market reaction to them because one of them just gapped up the day after, the other one sold off the day after. So it depends, I guess. We're still seeing some consolidation in that area. It seems obvious to me that there's still a bargain. Of course, a lot of these miners are actually on a PE basis cheaper now than when I got into them 2 or 3 years ago, which is crazy because like now the metals have gone up, 100+% since when I first bought these mining stocks. So their earnings have gone up anywhere from 100 to 500% just based on where their break-even cost is. So the earnings on these mining stocks has exploded higher, and I expect Wall Street to catch up with that eventually. It's been really surprising with how long it's taken other investors out there to kind of catch up with that. But it's typical. I guess I'm not surprised, but it's always interesting to live through it and to see that kind of delayed reaction taking place. But that's been what past cycles have looked like as well. And so I do expect that to continue. With the miners kind of playing catch up in a big way, hopefully coming up. We will see. But that's my overall thinking behind it. Of course, not investment advice, but just my overall observations, what I'm doing, what I see out there right now, why I remain very bullish. So, yeah, I'd love to know what all of you think. Hope to see all of you again at some point.